All right, let's get into it. Today, we're looking at three of the most unbelievable one-on-one duels ever recorded. I mean, we're talking about fights to the death where everything, honor, life, and even the judgment of God was put on the line.
So let's start our journey in 14th century France. This is an incredible story of a deep friendship, a terrible betrayal, and a fight where pretty much everyone believed God himself was going to show up and pick the winner.
Okay, so picture this. We're in the middle of the 100 Years' War. It's a time of knights and chivalry, for sure, but it's also a time where you might settle a legal dispute by, trying to kill someone in front of a huge crowd.
So meet our two main guys, Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legris. These two were more than just squires. They were basically brothers. They fought side by side, they were best friends. Jean even made Jacques the godfather to his son. It was a serious bond. But, well, that bond was about to be completely destroyed.
It all started to go south when a new count started playing favorites, and yeah, that created some jealousy. But the real breaking point? A horrifying accusation. Jean's wife, Marguerite, claimed that Jacques had brutally assaulted her. The problem was, there were no witnesses. The court had no idea what to do. So Jean demanded the only kind of justice he believed was left, a trial by combat.
Now, you gotta understand what this actually meant. This wasn't just some back alley brawl. This was a formal, legal proceeding. The winner wouldn't just get to live. He'd be declared truthful and righteous in the eyes of God in the entire kingdom. And the loser? He'd be dead, and his name would go down in history as a liar.
But the stakes were actually the highest for Marguerite. On December 29, 1386, she had to stand there watching this whole thing, dressed completely in black. Because if her husband lost, it was seen as God's way of saying she was the liar. And her punishment for that? Being burned at the stake. Her life was, quite literally, on the line.
The fight itself was just brutal. I mean, these guys were in full head-to-toe steel armor, charging at each other on horseback with lances. After those splintered, they went at it on the ground with axes and swords. At one point, Jacques, who was the bigger guy, got the upper hand and actually stabbed Jean right through the thigh. For a second there, it really looked like it was all over.
But somehow, Jean just powered through the pain. He managed to tackle Jacques, got on top of him, and started smashing his helmet with the handle of his dagger. With the blade finally at his throat, Jean screamed at him to confess. But Jacques, to his very last breath, swore he was innocent.
And just like that, Jean killed him, right there on the field. The crowd absolutely erupted. According to God's judgment, Jean and Marguerite were telling the truth. The king gave them a ton of money and titles, and their honor was saved.
So while Carouge put his faith in God, our next story shows that sometimes the deadliest weapon you can bring to a fight isn't a sword, it's your brain. We're jumping over to 17th century Japan to meet a samurai who showed up to the biggest duel of his life carrying a boat oar.
Man, this is a real clash of titans. In one corner, you've got Sasaki Kojiro. He's seen as the most skilled swordsman in all of Japan, a total master of his craft, famous for his massive 3-foot-long sword. And in the other corner, Miyamoto Musashi. This guy was a legend, undefeated, unkempt, totally unpredictable, and he'd already won 60 duels.
Musashi knew that in a straight-up fight of pure skill, Kojiro might actually have the edge, so he decided to play mind games. First, he shows up 3 hours late, a huge sign of disrespect guaranteed to get under the skin of a disciplined master like Kojiro. Then, he pulls out his sword, which was really just a wooden practice sword he'd carved out of a spare oar on the boat ride over. And the brilliant part is, he made sure it was just a few inches longer than Kojiro's famous blade.
So by the time Musashi finally strolls onto the beach, Kojiro is just fuming. He's furious. And to make it worse, Musashi positioned himself so the setting sun was right behind him, blinding Kojiro. Consumed by pure rage, Kojiro just charges recklessly. Musashi easily dodges the attack, and, with a single brutal strike with that wooden oar, he cracks Kojiro's skull. The greatest samurai duel in history was over. In seconds.
Okay, so we've seen a victory by faith and a victory by strategy. For our last duel, we're heading to the early days of the United States to see what happens when the winning ingredient is just pure, cold-blooded ruthlessness. Oh, and it features a guy who would later become the President of the United States.
So, in 1806, the future president Andrew Jackson, a guy famous for his incredibly hot temper, got into it with a man named Charles Dickinson. It all started with a dumb argument over a horse race bet, but things got ugly fast. Dickinson started insulting Jackson's wife, and then he published an article in the newspaper calling Jackson a coward. For a guy like Andrew Jackson, that was it. A line had been crossed. Now, Dickinson wasn't just some random guy. He was known as one of the best shots in all of Tennessee. So when the duel started, he got to fire first. He took his time, aimed right for the heart, and fired. It was a perfect shot, hitting Jackson square in the chest.
But Andrew Jackson didn't go down. He just stood there, staggered a bit, and clutched his chest, bleeding. You have to imagine the absolute shock on Dickinson's face. And because of the rules of dueling, he now had to just stand there, totally still, and wait for Jackson to take his shot.
Jackson, looking pale and furious, slowly raises his own pistol, takes aim, and pulls the trigger. And click. Nothing. It misfired. Now, according to the rules, that's it. A misfire counts as your turn. But Andrew Jackson did not care one bit about the rules. He just calmly recocked the pistol, aimed it again at a completely helpless Dickinson, and fired.
That shot killed Dickinson. But here's the crazy part. When doctors checked on Jackson, they found that Dickinson's bullet was lodged so close to his heart, it was too risky to ever remove it. So Andrew Jackson carried that bullet and the constant pain from it with him for the rest of his life.
Phew! So after all that, what can we take away from these 3 absolutely wild stories? We've seen 3 fights to the death, and really, each one was won for a totally different reason.
Jean de Carouge won because everyone believed God was on his side. Or maybe it was just pure grit and endurance. Miyamoto Musashi won because of a brilliant strategic plan, proving that your mind can be sharper than any sword. And Andrew Jackson, he won because he was absolutely, terrifyingly ruthless and was willing to break every single rule to make sure he was the one who walked away. So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you're in that ultimate one-on-one showdown, when everything is on the line, what is it that really makes the difference? Is it having God on your side? Is it a genius plan? Or is it just being more willing than the other guy to do whatever it takes to win?